1998 was President William Jefferson Clinton's most difficult and painful year in office, culminating in his impeachment. The Clinton administration has been engulfed in a maze of scandals and lawsuits. We'll examine some of the roots and circumstances of the allegations and, where possible, their outcome. The issues involve much more than sex and lies about sex. They involve evidence of illegal fundraising, invasions of privacy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of the powers of the presidency.
And in the next several days, we'll be laying out the code of ethical conduct that appointees in the Clinton-Gore administration must agree to abide by in order to serve in high office.
Some matters we'll look at have been investigated by independent counsels, some by congressional committees, some by the press. Larry Klayman is chairman of Judicial Watch, a legal ethics and watchdog organization that has investigated this administration more than any other entity. Judicial Watch has more than 20 lawsuits pending against various agencies and individuals in the administration, and it's gained wide latitude to depose and pursue some of the top officials of the country.
There is a common thread, and corruption generally comes from money. We have a situation where this administration has sold out the interests of the American people, whether it's government services like seats on trade missions or overnight stays in the White House or access to the president and vice president in exchange for campaign contributions.
The scandal that resulted in the impeachment of Bill Clinton involved allegations of perjury, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. It stems from an illicit sexual affair with a young White House intern, which came to light because of a civil rights sexual harassment lawsuit by Paula Jones, a former state of Arkansas employee. That suit was settled out of court in November of 1998. In October, the House Judiciary Committee and then the full House of Representatives voted to consider impeachment of the President of the United States for only the third time in the nation's history. The midterm election initially seemed to slow momentum toward impeachment, but Committee Chairman Henry Hyde observed 2 days after that election,
"Our duty demands that we look further. It requires that we search out the truth, face it squarely. It insists that we uphold the rule of law. It demands that we assure that both the President and the average citizen stand before the bar of justice equally."
On the weekend before Christmas 1998, the House of Representatives defied the public opinion polls and voted to impeach a sitting president for only the second time in America's history, leaving it up to the Senate to render its verdict.
But before Monica Lewinsky's name was linked to President Clinton's, there had been a trail of allegations unparalleled in recent times.
Monica, over here! How was your flight?
We're not going to revisit the Lewinsky saga, but we are going to look into the White House acquisition of FBI files, the wholesale firing of the White House Travel Office, IRS audits of potential adversaries, evidence of hush money paid to Webb Hubbell, the potential compromise of national security by the transfer of dual-use technology to China. These cannot all be linked directly to Bill Clinton, but together they tell a story of a presidency and an administration that began with such promise and in which so many people had placed such high hopes. A quarter century ago, a young lawyer on the committee inquiring into the impeachment of President Nixon once wrote that impeachment doesn't require criminal acts by the president. Her name was Hillary Rodham. Periodically, you'll see a website address where you may learn more information supporting these assertions, find editorials and articles from which certain quotes and facts have been taken, and find out more about this documentary and those involved in its production. The roots of scandal. We have chosen several of the so-called Clinton scandals to examine through interviews with participants and analysts, through historic footage and controversial videotaped depositions.
That would be extremely rare.
Whitewater.
So much has been written about Whitewater.
It started out as the name of a real estate venture on the White River in Arkansas, and it became the catch-all name that's become to the Clinton administration what Watergate was to the Nixon administration. The term invokes many reactions. To some, it's a failed land deal in which the Clintons lost money, and it grew into a partisan witch hunt that got way out of hand and was used as a weapon to try to defeat a twice-elected president. Others insist that it was about a brand of corruption that was later transferred from Arkansas to Washington, D.C., that it was about a savings and loan being looted and used as a slush fund by the Clinton political machine and their Whitewater partners, Jim and Susan McDougal, who owned the Madison Guarantee Savings and Loan.
Do you know of any money that could have gone from Madison to the Whitewater Project or to any of your husband's political campaigns?
Absolutely not. I do not.
By placing friends as state bank regulators, they were able to keep this bank open long after it was clear there were financial problems and insider shenanigans taking place. In March 1989, Madison Guarantee failed.
Now it is time to do something about Whitewater, and that something is congressional hearings.
In October 1993, federal regulators recommended that a criminal investigation be conducted into Madison's failure. In November, Republican lawmakers asked Attorney General Janet Reno to nominate a special counsel to investigate any ties between McDougal's failed S&L and the Whitewater development. In December, the media soon got wind of the fact that previously undisclosed documents relating to Whitewater had been removed from the office of close Clinton friend and Deputy White House counsel Vincent Foster, following his death on July 20th, 1993. James Stewart's book, Bloodsport, recounts the paranoid atmosphere in the White House as pressure rose to a near boiling point. On January 11th, the Washington Post, in its lead editorial, blasted the administration, calling the White House staff a, quote, gaggle of spinners and legal advisors whose only success thus far is to have managed by word and deed to make it appear as if the Clintons have something to hide. The editorial concluded that the need for the current probe to be turned over to someone independent of the administration is overwhelming. Yet Bernard Nussbaum urged the Clintons to avoid a special prosecutor at all costs. It would get, he said, out of hand. In January of 1994, Clinton gave way to intense political pressure and asked that a special prosecutor be appointed. Nussbaum called this a tragic error.
The investigation of Whitewater is being handled by an independent special counsel whose appointment I supported. Our cooperation with that counsel has been total.
In January 1994, Janet Reno selected as special counsel Robert B. Fisk, Jr.
If anybody's done anything wrong, they should be prosecuted and punished. And I'm confident that the special counsel will see to that. If they haven't done anything wrong, he should say that, and I'm confident that he will say that.
In March, the former Little Rock municipal judge, David Hale, pled guilty to 2 felony counts of defrauding the Small Business Administration, and he accused Bill Clinton of pressuring him to make a $300,000 loan in 1986 that would benefit Whitewater, the Clintons, and McDougals. In August 1994, a 3-judge special panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals replaced Attorney Fisk, whom some felt was not being aggressive enough. They appointed Kenneth Starr in his place. Ultimately, the McDougals and more than a dozen others were convicted of crimes related to this operation.
Let me tell you what Madison Guarantee turned out to be. It was a corrupt S&L owned by Jim McDougal, the Clintons' Whitewater partner. Federal regulators have said that it was operated as a criminal enterprise. Madison's collapse cost American taxpayers $60 million. That's real money. Make no mistake about it, American taxpayers lost money because of Madison S&L.
But the Clintons have not been indicted or charged with any crimes related to Whitewater or Madison Guarantee. Whitewater was only the first wave. Over the next 3.5 years, the same 3-judge panel continued to expand the scope of the Starr investigation, including everything from FileGate and TravelGate to the possibility that the former Associate Attorney General, Webster Hubbell, had been paid hush money to remain silent about his knowledge of the Clintons' involvement in Whitewater.
One of the articles of impeachment against Nixon was lying to the American people. Do you not see a parallel there?
What Richard Nixon did, as the House Judiciary Committee looked at it, was he used the powers of his office to delay, impede, obstruct the investigation of an unlawful entry into the opposition party's political headquarters. He covered up and concealed the scope of the unlawful entry by those who did it. He misused government agencies to conceal the extent of the crimes that had been committed. He obstructed the investigations that were then undertaken to determine what the facts were. He abused his authority by obtaining confidential information from the Internal Revenue Service, which he then misused in violation of the constitutional rights of American citizens. He misused the FBI, the Secret Service, to conduct unlawful wiretapping of American citizens. He maintained a secret unit in the White House to violate the constitutional rights of citizens, and he refused to provide information in a timely way to Congress, in contempt of Congress. So there's no parallel whatsoever.
Let me add a few brief words about the travel office matter. This phase of our work arose out of investigations by others of the 1993 firings of Billy Dale and 6 career co-workers. We do not anticipate that any evidence gathered in that investigation will be relevant to the committee's current task. The President was not involved in our travel office investigation.
Until the Clinton administration came to power, few had ever heard of the White House Travel Office, outside of those who benefited from its services. Billy Dale was working for the Veterans Administration when, in 1961, he was offered a chance at a better job.
And it made me a little nervous because I always envisioned the White House as being the power of the world, you know. And the gentleman noticed that I was a little nervous about it, and he asked me to think about it over the weekend. My wife and I talked it over and decided to go for it. And they sent me to the White House for an interview, and as a result of that, I got the job in the telegraph office and worked myself up to where I became director of the Travel and Telegraph Office in July of 1982.
Besides the outdated procedure of distributing telegraphs, the office provided the travel arrangements for the White House staff and executive branch, and chartered jets and made all the travel arrangements for the White House press corps. Administrations came and went, but Billy Dale and most of the others endured, at least up through the elections of 1992. Harry Thomason, a close friend of the Clintons and Thomason's partner Darnell Martins, had helped the Clinton campaign by providing charter air service. After the election, Thomason was a regular at the White House, trying to improve the Clinton image. Martins reportedly told Thomason that he'd heard rumors that the White House Travel Office was corrupt and disloyal to the Clintons. Thomason reportedly used this as a pretense to tell Hillary Clinton that the travel office employees were, quote, a bunch of crooks, and that they had to get their own people in there. Hillary, in turn, pressed Vince Foster and David Watkins, as was revealed in a series of documents later released. Dennis Scolambrini was the FBI's liaison in the White House. Here, in his first television interview, he says that several of the White House senior staff officers asked him about the competence of the 7 men who comprised the travel office and if he knew of any criminal activity in the office.
And I told them at the time that they were very competent. They were, to my knowledge, they were honest people, that we had done a number of background investigations on all 7 of them and had never come up with anything that was negative. We had interviewed members of the press. They had never complained about them before.
Nevertheless, the FBI was called in. Harry Thomason kept asking Watkins for updates, while Hillary was asking Vince Foster what was being done. In May of 1993, the White House fired 7 employees of the travel office.
We thought it was advisable to take immediate action, and so the previous staff has been dismissed. They'll be out of here by the end of today.
David Watkins called my staff and me into a meeting at 10:15 on May the 19th, 1993, and told us that we were going to be replaced. He wanted us out of the building within an hour and a half. I told him that was impossible for us to clear out in an hour and a half, and I remember his words very precisely. He said, well, okay, take until 5 o'clock today, but be aware of the fact that after 5 o'clock today, your passes will no longer be any good.
But the surprise firings were only the beginning of Billy Dale's problems. Scullambrini had been given advance notice of intended harassment by the Associate White House Counsel, William Kennedy.
Bill Kennedy threatened someone over headquarters that, well, if the FBI doesn't want to do this, we'll get the IRS to do this.
In order to portray the TravelGate 7 as the real wrongdoers, the White House officials unleashed a combined weight of the FBI, IRS, Justice Department, and the White House on the entire travel office staff, charging them all with embezzlement.
Well, the FBI never told me anything. They dealt through my attorney. It's amazing that I was accused of embezzling $68,000 over about a 5-year period, and they never talked to me.
Scullambrini was soon subpoenaed to testify at Billy Dale's trial. He knew that the charges of embezzlement against the entire staff were false because only Billy Dale and occasionally his deputy handled any money. The FBI tried to keep him from testifying by claiming that he had not notified his superior of the subpoena.
After I testified in the Dale trial, I was harassed.
I was indicted at December the 7th, 1994. Went to trial October the 26th, 1995. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The thing that made me the happiest, I think, or gave me the most delight in this trial was that the Justice Department couldn't find anybody. After investigating me for 30 months, they could not find one person throughout this world that I had done business with or had contact with that could come into, they could get to come into court and testify against me.
Unfortunately, Mr. Dale's speedy acquittal did not put an end to his 3-year ordeal. The IRS pursued Dale, threatening income tax audits. They then, in fact, did audit all 7 of the fired staffers. Because the staffers had good friends in the press, the story was widely covered, and the Congress voted to investigate.
I had somebody from each one of the major networks that came into court and testified for me, but I guess the most notable one would have been Sam Donaldson.
On September 18, 1996, the House Committee on Government Reform and Oversight released their findings on the White House Travel Office firings known as TravelGate. The committee found that the motive for the firings was political cronyism. The president sought to reward his friend Harry Thomason with the spoils of the White House travel business. A pretext for the firings was created, and the trigger was pulled. The committee's report described it as a story about the failure of the Clinton White House to live up to the ethical standards expected of the highest office in the land. Committee Chairman William Klinger was clearly appalled.
The men and the women in this White House have played fast and loose with the truth and with the lives of innocent people.
According to the Klinger report, both the FBI and IRS became involved in this matter because of Harry Thomason's false allegations that the travel office director, Billy Dale, had received illegal kickbacks from a charter airline company. The White House had long known that the alleged source of the kickback charges denied ever making them. But the White House nevertheless did nothing to correct the public record it had helped create. According to the committee majority, the wrongdoing of this administration lies not in the firings of the 7 travel office employees. They served at the pleasure of the president. If the president chose to fire them to reward political cronies, that was his prerogative, but he must then be ready to accept the consequences. The lives of 7 innocent, long-time career government employees were badly disrupted, their reputations smeared.
The way you guys were treated is beyond comprehension. It rivals, in my opinion, the Spanish Inquisition.
It was only after 3 years of intense scrutiny by the IRS that Mr. Dale was given a clean bill of health. A couple of footnotes, more findings by the Government Reform and Oversight Committee that investigated the scandal. After much stonewalling, the committee finally came into possession of a letter that White House advisor David Watkins had withheld from investigators. It was a letter to Hillary Clinton, in which he lamented that the GAO had revealed conversations that Watkins had with Mrs. Clinton. Watkins assured Mrs. Clinton that he knew who his client was and regretted revealing that Mrs. Clinton had told him she wanted, quote, those people out and our people in, close quote. An enormous and elaborate cover-up operation, as the committee's own words described TravelGate, housed in the White House counsel's office, sought to prevent numerous investigations from discovering not only the roles of who fired the workers and why, but also their efforts to persecute the victims. In the process, the administration may have severely damaged the credibility and prestige of the White House. It obstructed and frustrated all investigations. It turned the office of the White House counsel into a political damage control operation. It made frivolous claims of executive privilege. It abused its powers to smear innocent citizens. And most important, it failed to level with the American people. As a result, the committee concluded, the White House stands in contempt of its own constitutional responsibilities to faithfully uphold and execute the Constitution and laws of the nation. Never before has a president and his staff done so much to cover up improper actions and hinder the public's right to learn the truth.
I don't want to talk to Bill Clinton. Every time that I'm watching the news or something and Bill Clinton's face comes on the television screen, or Hillary Clinton, I change the channels. I just don't believe anything that they've got to say, and I don't think that anything I would say to Bill Clinton would do any good.
He abused his authority by obtaining confidential information from the Internal Revenue Service, which he then misused in violation of the constitutional rights of American citizens. So there's no parallel whatsoever.
Acting personally and through his subordinates and agents, he has endeavored to obtain from the Internal Revenue Service, in violation of the constitutional rights of citizens, confidential information contained in income tax returns for purposes not authorized by law, and to cause, in violation of the constitutional rights of citizens, income tax audits or other income tax investigations to be initiated or conducted in a discriminatory manner. That was one of the articles of impeachment lodged against Richard Nixon. Joseph Farah, who heads the Western Journalism Center, the WJC, and who publishes WorldNetDaily.com on the Internet, says he experienced the very same abuse of power by the Clinton administration. Farah said that the harassment began in the summer of 1994, when the WJC began investigating some of the alleged Clinton scandals, including the circumstances surrounding the death of the deputy White House counsel, Vincent Foster.
By the end of 1994, we now know that the White House was very concerned with our work, and the reason we know that is because of a memo that was released to congressional investigators later on, written in December 1994 from the White House counsel's office. It's known as the Sherburne Memo, written by Jane Sherburne. It was a 14-page document which outlined many of the Clinton scandals that we're very familiar with today.
Under Foster's suicide, she wrote Chris Ruddy / Western Journalism Center.
About a year later, that same White House counsel's office put out a document, a 331-page report called The Communication Stream of Conspiracy Commerce. What this is really an enemies list.
The Western Journalism Center was named in this document as one of 3 news organizations disseminating information about Vincent Foster's death.
A year later, the IRS knocked on our door, and the agent in charge of the investigation, a man by the name of Thomas Cedarquist, announced in no uncertain terms that he was going to challenge our tax-exempt status.
The reason he gave, according to Farah, was that he had seen a segment of 60 Minutes that talked about the WJC's work on the Foster case, and he decided that they were a political, not a journalistic organization. He then requested documents from Farah as part of an audit.
The document requests were not were not focused on our financial records. They were not really focused on our financial practices in any way. They focused on the content of our work. The document requests wanted information about why we chose to work with Chris Ruddy, why we chose to cover certain stories, all of them, by the way, focused on the White House. And we were stunned by this because, you know, I had never thought of the IRS as kind of a political watchdog before. And they seemed almost totally unconcerned with the normal audit measures, for instance, how we raised money. And
Farah's accountant says he asked the IRS agent in charge what this was all about.
And he said, look, this is a political case and the decision's going to be made at the national level.
Farah began researching to see if he was being singled out.
We were not alone in being targeted by the IRS for political reasons, that there were many other organizations, all of them Clinton adversaries, from the Heritage Foundation to the National Rifle Association, Citizens Against Government Waste, any number of public policy organizations that had challenged the Clinton administration policies. They were all being audited, many of them for the first time.
Farah also noted other strange things occurring, such as his office being broken into with nothing stolen, and telephone messages apparently being monitored. Some of these developments, he said, occurred in conjunction with breakthroughs in various Clinton investigations. This scrutiny, he said, went on for 9 months, nearly bankrupting the organization. Farah said one of his big donors even called to say that he had been told by the then Energy Department Secretary Hazel O'Leary that he would lose his federal contracts if he continued supporting the Western Journalism Center. In October 1996, Farah exposed the persecution of the WJC in a column in the Wall Street Journal. There were immediate repercussions, including IRS Commissioner Richardson's resignation. At the time, the New York Post attributed this to the growing controversy over the politically directed audits of conservative groups. Congress began probing these abuses, a development that also seemed to take some of the heat off. The audit was then concluded, and the case was closed in May of 1997 with a finding of absolutely no wrongdoing. Now, Farah wanted to find out how and why this process had occurred.
First thing we did was to ask for our case file from the IRS, which is a routine matter. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights specifically states that any taxpayer can have their case file after an audit is completed. Well, the IRS told us we couldn't have it.
A Freedom of Information Act request for the file was also rejected. The IRS claimed government privilege. Farah believes the case file would show involvement of White House and other Clinton administration officials in this case. The WJC, with the aid of Larry Klayman and Judicial Watch, has filed a $10 million lawsuit against IRS and White House officials. Farah laments the failure of his colleagues in the media to publicize his fight.
In the case against the Internal Revenue Service that we brought for the Western Journalism Center, we've confirmed that this was a political audit. That case is continuing. That the IRS was trying to control the content of what Western Journalism Center was writing about Vince Foster's death. Judicial Watch, which represents the American people, among other groups, felt that they had to step in, that we had to fill the breach, that there was a market niche, that we have to raise up ourselves and hold government accountable because government can't police itself.
Testifying before the Judiciary Committee on November 19th, independent counsel Kenneth Starr addressed his findings to date in connection with the acquisition by the White House of more than 900 FBI files.
As to the FBI files matter, there are outstanding issues that we are attempting to resolve with respect to one individual. But I can address two issues of relevance to the committee's work. First, our investigation, which has been thorough, found no evidence that anyone higher than Mr. Livingstone or Mr. Marcisa was in any way involved in ordering the FBI files from the FBI. Second, we have found no evidence that information contained in the files of former officials was actually used for an improper purpose.
Some critics believe that Starr has been far too passive in investigating this matter.
And we know in our FileGate case, with each witness that we depose or talk to, we ask whether they've talked to Starr's people. And generally the answer is no. Frankly, Ken Starr, with the exception of Lewinsky, has not done a very good job.
The FileGate story first came to light as a result of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee's hearings on TravelGate. The committee had long sought documents from the White House regarding the travel office firings that would shed light on who knew what and when. On June 5, 1996, the White House finally turned over 1,000 of 3,000 documents sought by that committee. Among the documents turned over were requests by the White House Personnel Security Chief, Craig Livingston, for the FBI file on the travel office head, Billy Dale. The White House counsel's office had withheld Billy Dale's FBI background file for months by misrepresenting it to the committee as a personnel file, effectively keeping the lid on the FileGate scandal. Also among the documents were more than 900 additional files, most on prominent Republicans from previous administrations, brought over from the FBI in 1993 and 1994. Among the background files collected were those of the former Bush administration Chief of Staff, James Baker, Press Secretary Marlin Fitzwater, the former CIA Director Robert Gates, National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft. On June 11th, President Clinton tried to put a lid on this potential scandal.
It appears to have been a completely honest bureaucratic snafu when we were trying to straighten out who had the security, who should get security clearances to come into the White House.
FBI Director Louis Freeh was less understanding when 3 days later he called it egregious violations of privacy without justification. During Watergate, Charles Colson went to jail for a year and a half for having misused one FBI file.
We've uncovered not just the illegal obtaining and misuse of over 900 FBI files, but we found that there's been a systematic effort in this Clinton administration to take information out of confidential government files and release it to try to harm adversaries and harm perceived witnesses in the various Clinton scandals.
Linda Tripp, who played a major role in the Monica Lewinsky scandal, was one of the people deposed by Larry Klayman in the FileGate case. The arrival of Billy Dale's file at the White House was a red flag for Tripp. She had witnessed firsthand the brutal firings of Dale and the travel office staff.
Why specifically were you more sensitized to the danger of those files at that time?
Because it was shortly thereafter that they were unceremoniously removed from the White House after many years of service, and they were all known to be professional, decent, honorable people, and they were not treated that way.
Tripp was working as executive assistant to the White House counsel, Bernie Nussbaum, while stack after stack of files continued to arrive.
With the ones that I had seen in the stacks in Mr. Kennedy's office, the ones I had seen on Mr. Foster's desk, the ones I had seen in Mr. Foster's safe in Bernie Nussbaum's office.
Such as the Dale file.
Such as the Dale file, and ones I had seen in Mr. Livingstone's office.
A key question in all of this is who hired Craig Livingston and why?
No, Mr. Nussbaum, did you know who hired Craig Livingston?
I think I'm going to answer your question when I say that.
It could be yes or no. Do you know who hired Craig Livingston?
I don't know who brought Craig Livingston into the White House.
That's the answer to my question.
But Mr. Foster,
I want to ask Mr. Kennedy if he knows who hired Craig Livingston.
Livingston and his friend Tony Marcisa, who was borrowed from the Defense Department to work on the FBI files, were both Democratic operatives who had specialized in opposition research. The two had previously worked on the presidential campaigns of both Gary Hart and Al Gore.
Craig Livingstone and Anthony Marcisa are emerging as more shadowy figures with far more partisan and questionable backgrounds than the White House ever acknowledged.
Dennis Scolombrini, the FBI agent who had been the FBI's liaison in the White House since 1986, said that he had put a system in place that required every White House request to the FBI to first be passed through him. In May 1993, the door to Livingston's later raid on the FBI files was opened when Scullambrini was told by his immediate supervisor that the White House Chief of Staff, Thomas Mac McClarty, had ordered a change in procedure.
I was told by my supervisor that I was to discontinue my practice of getting a copy of every White House request to the FBI. I was not to go into room 84 every day like I have been doing for the past 10 years. So it was during that period of time when I was not getting a copy of every request that the 900 files were sent over. I think that's pretty interesting.
Scullambrini believes he can answer the question of who hired Craig Livingston. Part of Scullambrini job was to interview people for certain White House jobs that included vetting Craig Livingston.
Because Craig said, my mother knows Hillary Clinton.
As part of the process, Scullambrini says he verified this with the White House counsel, Bernard Nussbaum.
Bernard Nussbaum stated that Craig Livingston's mother and Hillary Clinton are known to each other and that he comes highly recommended.
Linda Tripp says she heard about it directly from Livingston.
I can only tell you who Craig Livingstone told me hired Craid Livingstone.
And what did he tell you?
He told me Mrs. Clinton hired him.
Scullambrini reported this as an insert into Livingston's background investigation. When Livingston's role in requisitioning the FBI files became known and questions were raised about how this former bar bouncer came to be hired, FBI General Counsel Howard Shapiro sent 2 FBI agents to Scullambrini's home, where he was on sick leave, to question him about his report. They told him, he says, that Mrs. Clinton had denied knowing Livingston's mother and that she also denied recommending Livingston be hired. According to Scullambrini, he was then asked, how dare you question the word of the First Lady? Although he explained that he had simply reported what Nussbaum had told him, and that Nussbaum and other officials of the counsel's office never had challenged the accuracy of his background report on Livingston, Scullambrini's luck turned for the worse. Soon the White House was putting out stories claiming that he was a disgruntled employee, that he had not signed the report, and that the report was undated. Scullambrini says all of these claims are false. Ironically, Livingston had previously been put in charge of securing the travel office records on the day of the firings, and Secret Service entry logs indicate that Livingston had access to the White House residence when he had no apparent reason for being there. Reminiscent of the Rosemary Wood 18-minute gap in the Nixon tapes during Watergate was a 6-month gap in the checkout log of FBI files from Livingston's office from March 29, 1994 to September 21st of 1994, when no entries were made. When Clayman deposed the former associate White House counsel and Hillary Clinton Rose law firm partner William Kennedy, he admitted having had stacks of FBI files in his office, and once there at the White House, the files apparently stayed there, regardless of criticism from the FBI director Free or from anyone else.
From time to time, were these FBI summaries returned to the FBI, the ones that were delivered from the FBI to the White House?
No. That would be extremely rare, extremely rare. Once they came to us, they were considered to be part of presidential records and dealt with as such.
So based on your experience and responsibilities, any FBI summaries that were obtained when you were at the White House are still at the White House?
As far as I know, yes.
Kenneth Starr interviewed Mrs. Clinton about the FBI files for only 9 minutes. Scullambrini already was in trouble for having testified truthfully in Billy Dale's trial. He got into more trouble for reporting on Nussbaum's comments regarding the connection between Hillary Clinton and Craig Livingston's mother. But what finally ended his career with the FBI was his refusal to deny a statement attributed to him by Gary Aldrich in his book Unlimited Access. Scullambrini's statement reads, "How does character count in our jobs if this administration has thrown character, standards, the law, everything out the window?" Scullambrini has since concluded, quote, Clintons abolished security here for a whole year now, and the Secret Service, the FBI, the military, Congress, nobody's willing to challenge the way the Clintons are staffing the government or endangering national security." End quote.
I know that at times I came up short. I know at times that I didn't, have the right information. Frankly, the president misled me too. So I came here and misled you on occasion, and that was grievously wrong of him, but he's acknowledged that.
Bill Clinton's presidency has taken a heavy toll on his friends and family. A few have prospered, parlaying their closeness to the president into lucrative positions. Dee Dee Myers, James Carville, and George Stephanopoulos, to name but a few. Mac McClarty, Clinton's oldest friend and former chief of staff, recently helped facilitate what could become, if approved, the biggest merger in history, the nearly $80 billion deal between Exxon and Mobil. Other Clinton associates have not fared so well, having suffered disgrace or ethical or legal problems that have cost them money, their reputations, or worse. Webster Hubbell is a classic example. His failings were very much of his own making, but they were exposed and magnified as the result of his close relationship with both Bill and Hillary Clinton, whose actions on his behalf raised some serious questions. Up until the time that Hubbell came to Washington with the Clintons to take the job of number 3 man in the Justice Department, Associate Attorney General, Hubbell had lived a storybook life.
But Arkansas proves no pushover.
From star football player at the University of Arkansas to mayor of Little Rock. From Hillary Clinton's law partner in the Rose Law Firm, one of the state's most prestigious, to Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court.
Hubbell served in the Justice Department until he was forced to resign in April 1994. He pled guilty December 6, 1994, to fraud and income tax evasion, for having defrauded the Rose firm and its clients of $480,000 between 1989 and 1992. He served nearly 17 months in prison, but prior to going to prison, Hubbell became ensnared in more controversy that still threatens to further damage the Clinton legacy.
First, on March 13, 1994, after a meeting at the White House where it had been discussed, that Mr. Hubbell would resign from the Justice Department. Then Chief of Staff Mac McClarty told Mrs. Clinton that, in his words, "We're going to be supportive of Webb." As this criminal investigation was beginning in 1994 under Bob Fisk and then later my office, Mr. Hubbell received payments totaling nearly $550,000 from several companies and individuals. Many were campaign contributors. These individuals had been contacted through the White House Chief of Staff, Mr. McClarty, and others.
It was revealed that a group of President Clinton's associates, Vernon Jordan, Mickey Cantor, Erskine Bowles, and Mac McClarty, had arranged lucrative consulting work for Hubbell in 1994 before he went to jail.
One of the individuals who arranged for Mr. Hubbell to receive a consulting contract was Vernon Jordan. The company that Mr. Jordan convinced to hire, to engage Mr. Hubbell, was McAndrews and Forbes, the parent company of Revlon. This is the same company that hired Monica Lewinsky upon Mr. Jordan's recommendation. As he was destined later to do with Monica Lewinsky, Mr. Jordan personally informed the President about Mr. Jordan's assistance to Mr. Hubbell.
The New York Times had carried a front-page story, an editorial, and a column about it on May 5th and 6th of 1997. The article strongly suggested both Mr. and Mrs. Clinton had lied when they denied knowing that Hubble was facing prosecution when he resigned from justice. This was their defense against allegations they had arranged for payments to Hubble to buy his silence. The Times reported that they had been warned that Hubble was in deep legal trouble by their own attorney, David Kendall, and by James Blair, the general counsel of Tyson Foods. They were advised to get Hubble's resignation as quickly as possible. A.M. Rosenthal, the former executive editor of the Times, said in his syndicated column, and we quote, "Until the Times report, I found it hard to believe the Clintons would take the risk of an obstruction of justice charge, the accusation that led to Richard Nixon's resignation, and go down the same road of stonewalling."
In June 1994, during a week in which he made several visits to the White House, Indonesian businessman James Riyadi met with Webster Hubble and then wired him $100,000.
The president told reporters he knew nothing about that payment to Hubble by the Lippo Group, the Indonesian conglomerate owned by the Riyadi family. Shortly after it was made, a Riyadi employee, the controversial John Huang, was appointed to a high-level position in the Commerce Department. Representative Dan Burton, chairman of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, subpoenaed the 18 organizations and individuals who had put up money to support Hubble. It was, in fact, not $550,000, but at least $700,000.
This rush of generosity obviously gives rise to an inference that the money was essentially a gift. And if it was a gift, why was it given? This money was given despite the fact that Mr. Hubble was under criminal investigation for fraudulent billing and was a key witness in the Madison Guarantee investigation.
Burton also obtained the tapes of Hubble's phone calls from prison, in which he and his wife, Susie, discussed his plan to keep silent.
And you forget, I'm not telling anybody what I did or what they paid me.
They also talked about her fear of losing her government job and what that meant to Webb.
I'm the one that bears the brunt of this stuff up here. I'm the one that has to try and talk to people. I'm the one that has to try and explain to Marcia. I'm saying, Marcia, she said, you're not going to get any public support for this if you open up Hillary. Well, by public support, I know exactly what she means. I'm not stupid.
And I sit there and spent sanity with you saying I would not do that. I won't erase those allegations that might open it up to Hillary. And you know that. We talked about it.
Yes. But then I get all this back from Marcia, who's ratcheting it up and making it sound like, you know, if Webb goes ahead and sues the firm back, then any support I have at the White House is gone. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing the squeeze play.
So I need to roll one more time.
Hubble had apparently seen this as a message that he should subordinate his own interests to those of the President and the First Lady. In April of 1998, Whitewater independent counsel Kenneth Starr indicted Hubble on charges of tax evasion, including failure to pay over $850,000 in taxes and penalties. The U.S. District Judge James Robertson threw out the case in July, saying that Starr had exceeded his jurisdiction and built the case on improperly obtained evidence. Starr has appealed the ruling. In November 1998, Kenneth Starr indicted Hubble on charges he allegedly had schemed to falsify, conceal, and cover up the true nature of the role that he and Mrs. Clinton had played in the Castle Grande deal. Two federal agencies concluded that Castle Grande involved insider dealing, fictitious sales, and land flips. The deal ended up costing taxpayers an estimated $4 million. The case against Hubble could fill in a lot of the unknown parts of the Whitewater story in some dramatic courtroom showdown. Or, well, maybe he'll decide to roll over one more time.
I don't believe you can find any evidence of the fact that I had changed government policy solely because of a contribution.
A significant figure was discovered by Larry Klayman and Judicial Watch in a lawsuit against the Commerce Department. What later emerged would shake the foundations of the national security community.
Mr. Wong, did you ever meet with Mr. Clinton at the White House?
Yes.
When?
I don't know the exact date, but quite a few times. I met with Clintons, both, many times.
John Wong, who we uncovered in our case, passed sensitive national security information to the Chinese. John Wong worked at the Commerce Department. He played a role in those trade missions. His friends, cronies, and patrons went on the trade missions. And it was on those trade missions that national security was likely compromised.
Mr. Klayman's concerns are echoed by those who are experts in matters regarding national security and China.
It is potentially, and probably will prove to have been, the most significant national security scandal this country has faced.
Ed Timperlake is a veteran congressional investigator with 30 years' experience in national security and an expert on the PRC, the People's Republic of China. He is also co-author of Year of the Rat, a book that contains allegations that the Clinton administration sold influence and technology to China in exchange for campaign cash.
The issue of Chinese People's Republic of China money going into the White House and favors going out has profound consequences for the national security of the United States.
During the 1992 presidential contest, Clinton made China an issue by criticizing the Bush administration policy in dealing with China.
In China, the president continues to coddle aging rulers with undisguised contempt for democracy, for human rights, and for the need to control the spread of dangerous weapons technologies.
An America that will not coddle tyrants from Baghdad to Beijing.
Mr. Timperlake, who worked on China affairs in the Bush administration, recalls Clinton's fierce campaign rhetoric in '92.
We were pummeled without mercy on our position, coddling up to the butchers of Beijing, coddling dictators, selling out to China. Both President Clinton and Al Gore were very, very, very harsh on that.
James Woolsey, who was Clinton's first appointee as Director of Central Intelligence, recalls how things changed after the election.
What was the difference between what was said in the campaign and what became the actual policy?
The actual policy, I think, is considerably more accommodating to China and less forceful in terms of issues such as human rights.
What Clinton failed to reveal to the public in 1992 is that despite his anti-China message, his political campaign was being financed by Asian tycoons with business interests in Beijing.
Actually a surprise to us that the leading donor for the 1992 Clinton-Gore election effort was not a Hollywood mogul, it was not a labor union, it was the Riyadi family of Jakarta, Indonesia.
And once Clinton had arrived at the White House on a boulevard paved in part with Asian gold, he received a message from his benefactors.
When they wanted John Wong in the government, so they had made an investment and they wanted a return.
While the Riyadis were jockeying for John Wong's placement for what they later referred to as their man in Washington, Beijing was raising its stake in one of Lippo's Hong Kong holdings. China Resources, from its perch as an antenna for the People's Republic of China's financial interests around the world, also serves Chinese military intelligence operations.
China Resources was used as a collection vehicle. Now again, remember, this is a very large-scale corporation, if you will. But it was also exploited, if you will, by Chinese military intelligence for collection purposes. And in particular, the China Resources in Hong Kong had I believe, a PLA officer in one of the vice presidential slots, and that position was used for access for scouting foreign technology and commercial intelligence useful to the PLA.
Nicholas F. Timyatis is a top sinologist and the author of the book Chinese Intelligence Operations. In the book, Mr. F. Timyatis explains how China Resources procures and maintains holdings in Hong Kong and other places to serve as military intelligence collection outposts. And within days of the 1992 election, catapulting the Riyadi's longtime friend from Arkansas into the most powerful position on earth, China Resources became Riyadi's business partner. Prior to the '92 election, Lippo's Hong Kong Chinese bank was cash poor and struggling to sell shares. Immediately after the election, however, China Resources bought 15% of Hong Kong Chinese Bank. During the spring of 1993, the Riyadhis demonstrated direct access to President Clinton through a series of private meetings at the White House, which culminated in June of that year when Clinton abandoned his criticism of Bush's China policy and renewed most favored nation trading status to the PRC. 1 month later, the People's Republic purchased 35% of the Riyadhis' Hong Kong Chinese Bank at a 50% premium. That turned what was essentially a very large financial drain for the Riyadhis and Lippo and made it pay off like a slot machine at a Macau casino. And within months of that transaction, a Lippo vice president, John Huang, gets a top-secret security clearance and 5 months later joins the Commerce Department.
It ultimately comes down to how much you care about a foreign entity influencing or being able to influence the United States.
I should have learned by now. I have known John Huang a very long time.
The Clinton-Huang-Lippo alliance goes back further than the 1992 elections.
The roots go back to the Arkansas days with then candidate Clinton for one of the many offices where he started to tie in with the Riyadhi family of Indonesia, an Indonesian banking family. He met up with a fellow named John Huang, their man in America.
In Beijing, Huang is known by a different name.
A person called Wang Jiannan.
Lao Tut-man is a Chinese dissident who fled to Hong Kong. He now keeps track of the self-appointed heirs to the PRC power structure, many of whom are the sons and the daughters of the old guard rulers of China. These movers and shakers of the ever-expanding Chinese government are referred to mockingly as princelings by the critics of the PRC. Congressional investigators say they have traced large donations not only to Clinton's campaign, but also to Clinton's personal defense fund, traced them back to these so-called princelings.
Ung Lap Singh is the money man for Charlie Tree, a Chinese gangster, a made member of the secret Chinese criminal society known as the Four Seas Gang, who greets Clinton, by the way, with a term of affection. I think it's Lao Ki or something like that, Old Clinton, which is a Chinese term for reverence. Tree goes into the president's legal defense fund. Now, you have to remember, that is directly to Bill Clinton. This isn't a confusion point here. This is not soft money. It's not hard money. It's not DNC money. This is direct money to Bill Clinton, because that legal defense fund exists for one purpose, his purpose. Charlie Tree walks into an office with a bag full of checks totaling approximately $460,000 to the president's legal defense fund. That money is directly earmarked for President Clinton's use.
How much did the president know about the origins of the money flowing into his campaign coffers and legal defense fund? In the spring of 1997, the Washington Post quoted FBI sources as saying they had warned several Democratic candidates for national office that the PRC was attempting to influence the elections that year. But a more revealing clue leads back to the White House database, where the names of all the contributors were kept, including the name Ung Lak Sem, the Macau casino operator who holds rank in the Chinese Communist Party.
Ung Lap Singh runs a fortuna, and in Macau, where gambling and prostitution is legal, the man makes his money running that type of operation. In addition, though, he's also a Communist Chinese Party official.
Mr. Timberlake explains the problems associated with these kinds of transactions.
Of course, you cannot solicit money in American politics from foreign sources. You can't extort money out of them quid pro quo. There's a host of things, that the lines they've stepped over, all connected with People's Republic of China money and going to the president for favors.
Former princeling investment banker Randolph Kwan claims to know firsthand about the favors granted to China by the White House.
He told me, he's not worried about it, and that there will be no criminal prosecution of him because they have a special channel to Washington, to high decision-making circles.
That is how Kwan's princeling boss, Lao Yongyi, head of First Shanghai and son of Lao Sun, a high-ranking Chinese intelligence agent, responded to Kwan's inquiry about a Securities and Exchange Commission investigation into a Lao-sponsored retirement plan, that allegedly defrauded elderly New York citizens out of their retirement money.
And I mean, he acted as if, it's really nothing, that is almost beneath him.
At the time Mr. Kwon revealed his story, January of 1997, the China campaign finance scandal was just coming to light. But Securities and Exchange Commission documents indicate that Lao's retirement fund was a Ponzi scheme that left many elderly New Yorkers broke. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched an investigation, but then dropped it soon after it began.
Of course, for him to say that, he's immune, he has access to the top, it's not strange to me, really, because he's already the top, he's a prince. Okay, so he have access to another prince in another country.
But immunity from alleged financial crimes may not be the whole story.
I would put a date on it, is about October 1994. This is an idea he was kicking around, And Lau actually came to me and said that his good friend, another princeling, General He Ping, who is the son-in-law of Deng Xiaoping, actually is at that time doing a deal with the hope of cornering the arms market, the small arms market in the U.S., That means rifles and handguns, he also mentioned bazookas, whatever. And he said that, he's thinking of perhaps, I can raise some money, for him to go in with General He Ping. And of course, he's a general, General He Ping, and he's actually the commander-in-chief of the equipment department of the People's Liberation Army. Well, it's all the same group, but another company. The company is called China International Trust and Investment Corporation, and its subsidiary called Polytechnologies.
Polytechnologies is a company started by the Chinese government, actually the equipment department of the General Staff Department of the People's Liberation Army. And what it does is a lot of the arms transfers, most of the arms transfers on behalf of the PLA.
The president of the PLA front company Polytechnologies is Wang Jun, whose father was a former vice president of the People's Republic. On February 6, 1996, Wang met with President Clinton at a reception reserved for campaign contributors. 2 months later, Wang's company, Polytechnologies, was tipped off that it was the target of a U.S. Customs sting operation, and sources close to the investigation have indicated they believe the leak came from the U.S. State Department. The sting had been a product of nearly a year and a half of highly sensitive undercover work. Customs had discovered that Polytechnologies was part of an elaborate weapons trafficking operation that had sent 2,000 AK-47s to San Francisco to be smuggled into the United States and headed for the black market. And customs agents were trying to lure He Ping to the United States to be arrested for his part in the operation.
Of course, I'm no lawyer, but I cautioned him from the very first that if it concerns arms, it would be very sensitive. He has to get all kind of approvals and has to make sure it's legal, And then he, of course, smiled. He said that they really are not really concerned about that because if anything goes wrong, they can fix things up in Washington. They got this channel to Washington.
But when Customs learned that Polytechnologies had already learned of the sting operation, they were forced to act quickly and apprehended the suspects at hand, which included 5 ethnic Chinese men who were living in the United States. A host of others escaped to China, including a high-ranking PLA officer who was named in the indictment as Robert Ma, but whose real identity is Ma Boping.
Ma Boping 咧就走返大陸。
But what I know is that the key person, Ma Boping, escaped to China.
But it is not the weapons coming from China that national security experts are so concerned about. It's the weapons technology that's going to China from the United States.
We don't want to decipher not only military secrets, but also commercial interest.
Ignatius Ding is a Silicon Valley executive who's an expert in computer technology. Mr. Ding sees a potentially dangerous pattern in the way China's been able to obtain technology from the United States.
June 22nd, there is a little half-a-page memo from White House slipped right through Congress to declassify, allow to release technology to China alone.
And Mr. Ding believes this was no accident.
It is a maneuver. It's sort of a, if you pay me right, you get it, piece by piece. It's a scan. It's a two-way thing. Chinese want to get it. The Clinton administration want to use that bait, I think.
For money?
Oh, yeah.
In general, I would say that an American administration would have been loath to agree to an export of encryption technology, simply because the technology and the mechanisms for making machinery would have revealed something of American knowledge of making these kinds of machines, and that might give insights to another country's efforts to penetrate American codes.
John Prados is a national defense historian and has written extensively about the importance of cryptographic technology to the U.S. national security.
In the Cold War, cryptology continued to be of great significance, probably increasing significance, because the issues of war and peace in a situation where war had not broken out were even more crucial to the sides that were involved in the conflict.
The cryptographic technology transfer is one example, but evidence suggests there are others.
Well, the United States has substantially liberalized its export policy. That's one thing that has changed during this administration. There is really very little knowledge now of what is being exported in a lot of cases, and certainly the end use to which it's put.
It is the end use of missile technology exports that Pentagon officials believe are currently threatening U.S. national security. In April of '96, the New York Times reported that 2 U.S. aerospace companies who had contracts with China to launch their satellites aboard the Chinese Long March rockets transferred key technology that enhanced China's missile guidance systems. Other Pentagon officials confirmed that scientists from the 2 firms had transferred the technology ostensibly to better enable China's satellite launching capabilities, but this is the same information that could be used in China's missile guidance systems that carry nuclear warheads. Bernard Schwartz, the CEO of Loral Space and Communications, was the leading individual donor to the Democratic National Committee. Critics have suggested that that may have been why President Clinton effectively took the teeth out of the Justice Department's investigation of Loral in February of '98, when he approved a waiver for Loral to launch additional satellites on China's Long March rocket. The Justice Department had warned against approving the waiver. The White House has claimed that they are only continuing the policies of previous administrations. But Pentagon officials who have spoken on condition of anonymity say that during the previous 2 administrations, if there was a disagreement between the administration and the Pentagon on technology transfers, the Pentagon always prevailed when China was involved.
The person and the institution that had the largest degree of institutional concern in that debate was the Department of Defense, because they need to be worried about American ship and troop movements being tracked in the event of hostilities and the like.
I need to state up front that the opinion...
Defense expert Dr. Peter Leitner says he saw something happen to national security during the Clinton administration.
Well, the term I used before Congress on a couple of occasions was politicized, that the objectivity, the national security sort of patina that used to envelop the process has basically been removed, and it's now, for the most part, in my view, a bare-knuckles struggle between economics, trade, and security, with security taking the back seat.
Are you happy with the general result of it? Do you think it's been a progress toward peace, or have we approached an abyss here?
I believe in having a cordial, indeed on some issues friendly, relations with China, but I believe on opening up technology transfer, we have gone too far in accommodating Chinese interests.
The ones who will suffer eventually will be our soldiers and sailors and airmen. Eventually, somewhere, sometime, we're going to face the Chinese in a situation far from home, with very little in terms of staging area and logistics and support,
Whatever we have in the field at the time, we're in a remote location, is all we'll have to go with, and we'll be facing an enemy who's going to be a whole lot more advanced technologically and militarily than they would have been otherwise. And what that spells in a military engagement is human lives. That's what hangs in the balance.
Clearly, this is not the legacy that Bill Clinton would claim or acknowledge, nor is it intended to be a complete picture of his administration. Now, as we said at the outset, we did not revisit the Lewinsky affair, nor did we examine the other salacious stories that have swirled about President Clinton. Practical considerations prohibited the exploration of other relevant issues, some of which can be found on the website clintonlegacy.org, which is a work in progress. Why are all these subjects on the event horizon of America as it approaches a new millennium? We have been assured by administration defenders it is because of a vast right-wing conspiracy, a privately funded vendetta, a litigious lawyer with wide-ranging powers of subpoena, none of which explains why there was so much to find. Never mind the motive of the plowman. Consider what has been turned up. A previous occupant of the White House, a plain man out of Kentucky by way of Illinois, once observed, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power."